How do you survive hard times? What are hard times? I know for us in '93, we had a blizzard. Our driveway was 1.5 miles long. We had 23 or 24 inches of snow, and I had a small 3-cylinder, 4-wheel drive John Deere tractor with a bucket on the front of it and a scrape box in the back. And I got that bucket and that tractor and headed down the driveway, and I couldn't go scraping the driveway downhill with a 4-wheel drive tractor. I knew I was in trouble. But we lived in the country. We had made some provision. We didn't have power for 10 days. How much stuff did we lose? Nothing. Because we opened the door to the outside and shut the inside door to the utility room, and it was cold enough at night it kept the freezer frozen. We had plenty of snow in the front yard to get water from, and I gave the chainsaw to the 2 boys, and I turned the tractor around. I said, you saw the trees out of the 1.5 mile driveway, and I'll get the snow out of it. And the second day, we were out on the county road, headed over the hill when the half-track of the National Guard came by, and they said, oh, anybody in here need help? No, not that we know of. Well, what about food? What about medicine? Well, no. If they had needed it, we would have gotten it for them, because country people will survive. They have to depend on other people, and they have to make provision. You can't run to the store for milk and bread every time you want milk and bread. So what are hard times for you? I would suggest that anything out of the normal and customary daily life can be a hard time. And it will be a hard time in the inverse relationship to the amount of preparation that you have made. If you haven't made any preparation, you're going to be in a heap of hurt. If you have a drilled well and you have a hole in the ground with water down there somewhere, and you don't have a drilled well bucket, you're going to be hurting if you don't have electricity. And then if you have that drilled well bucket and you don't have a rope to attach to it, and well, it's easier with a windlass that you can wind it up, but you don't have to. You can pull it up by hand. You're still going to be hurting. That's known as preparation. And we're going to talk about some preparation. I'm going to show you some things that you might consider acquiring so that you're more prepared. I would suggest that the first provision each of us needs to make is that we need to rely on our Heavenly Father. He knows all the things. He knows the ins, the outs. He knows everything about us. He knows how we're going to react, and He can provide for us. But I would hasten to say that you're never going to be fully prepared for anything. And I know of counsel, and I believe the counsel, that says that there will come a time most anticipation is greater than the event. It's worse than it actually happens. But we're told that there will come a time that will be worse than we even imagined. Okay? How do you prepare for that? Very carefully. I would suggest to you that the best preparation is to live in the country, have redundancy. What is that? Have plenty of fuel, water, food for animals, whatever you need, and need minimal inputs. Now that's the ideal. Will we ever achieve the ideal? I doubt it, not in this life. But the closer you get, the more prepared you'll be. And if you produce your own food, you're going to be focused instead of scrambling. So to me, preparation is the key to the whole thing. How do you test your resiliency and your redundancy? Very easy. You ready? Just go to the panel and click it from on to off and see how that alters your life. And that'll tell you more about your resiliency and your redundancy than I can stand here all day and tell you. Okay? I challenge you. Immerse yourself in it. Shut off your power. What survival skills do you have? Now, when we do relational classes, I suggest to the couples that camping is a good way to get to know him or her. And if you really want to know them, go snow camping, where you're wet and you're cold and you struggle to get a fire going to get some heat. I'm telling you, you're going to know them before you get done. And I'm thankful to have a wife that's pretty much a positive gal that has a smile most of the time, as I don't know as I could take it a whole lot other than that. But we need to have a mental toughness, because the experts say that should this country ever experience an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, where a bomb goes off above the continent, it will destroy the whole electrical grid, and 80% of the population is projected to be dead within 2 years. Oh. Now we get down to the serious part. That's going to be mental toughness. We're going to be relying on God's power. Water, do you have a hand pump on the well? You can put it right in that same well. Have a hand pump. Mine's not in, but I have one. Heat. Do you only have one source of heat? Is it the electric knob? What if you don't have any electricity? If you have wood, at least you have a backup. If you have a third one, if one breaks, you have two others. You see where I'm going. Food. If you produce your own food, you're better off. If you have corn in a crib, there's a lot of eating in a corn crib. Now, you may get tired of corn grits and cornmeal mush and cornbread, but it beats nothing, I'll holler. Transportation. If you don't have a car, do you have a bicycle? What about a horse? Other than that, you better make sure you got plenty of hiking boots, is all I can tell you, because priorities will establish what we need to do as far as provision. In healthcare, we have a term, and that is triage. When people are brought in by ambulance, the doctor doesn't treat everybody. If someone's almost dead and there's nothing that they can do for them, they move on to the next person that requires their care to be able to have the possibility of living, and they ignore this person that has a minor wound. That's called triage. Life is number one. Health is number two. Comfort can be number three. So we can triage our priorities pretty much. We need life's basic necessities. We're going to have air pretty quickly. We are going to have to be warm very shortly thereafter. And we can survive a while without water and a good while longer without food. But those are the basic necessities of life. Shelter needs to be able to keep us dry and reasonably warm when it's cool, or reasonably cool when it's hot. Do you know how to go out in the woods and do that with the available material? It's a good knowledge if you can. Water, drinking and cooking water, bathing and wastewater, how do you handle it? Food, sustenance versus preference. Now, I'd love to have what I want in a survival situation, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I'm going to be glad to have something to eat. Hard times. The original challenge to a homestead, the greatest challenge was fire. Dealing with wildfire, you use fire to heat with, to cook with, but fire that was out of control was the greatest challenge that they had. We need to know how to deal with fire. We got a phone call one morning about 4 o'clock. I was building a 3-story, and Nicole called saying Mike was headed to work, and he said I ought to call and see if you guys are all right because Allan and Jill's whole hill is on fire. I looked out, and she was right, and so was he. What had happened is the tree had gotten down on the power line. The wind had scraped it back and forth, causing sparks to go down on the ground, and it started burning. And it was burning right up toward the road, and this whole 3-story building that I was building was just across the road. Fortunately, one of the hats that I used to wear was that I used to be on a volunteer fire department. And I knew there are 2 primary weapons after a fire extinguisher. A flat shovel, a square-nosed or flat shovel, and a wet mop. I didn't have the wet mop, so I grabbed a square shovel. And I also knew that if I could hold that fire that was coming up the hill at the road, at the driveway, I stood a chance of keeping it out of that building. So I began working that road. It's known as a fire break. Jill, by that time, was dressed and got up there, and we could hear the fire truck going along down in the valley. Somebody had called it and reported it, but they didn't know how to get up there. I said, you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to get in a vehicle, and you're going to have to drive out the road. The flames are going across. I said, yes, you're going to have to. It's either you or me, and I have to do what I'm doing. So, precious lady that she is, she drove through those flames out the driveway and brought the fire truck back. They unloaded the dozer, began ditching it, and within 30 minutes, Jill started praying, and within 30 minutes, it began to sprinkle. These are real things that we need to think about. Storm, flood, hurricane, tornado, snow and ice, earthquake, tsunami. Obviously, in the mountains, you're not going to have a tsunami. But think very carefully about the hard times that you may face. Drought, crop failure, radiation. It can come by design and fault of that design, or it may come through an act of nature, destroying something like Fukushima Daiichi. Doesn't change the fact that it's radiation. Financial failures, health emergencies, relational challenges, and apocalypse. So, since fire was the greatest hazard to pioneer life, what can we do about it? Make sure that you have safe and secure chimneys. My friends in the plain community don't even use tile flue liners. They use stainless steel because it's less prone to degrade and have challenge. If you have a stovepipe, buy galvanized or stainless steel stovepipe. You don't have to replace it near as often. Keep that stovepipe cleaned out from your soot. You're going to have it. Clean it out. Eliminate or isolate fire hazards. Keep the leaves away from your house. Keep it in mind. Think about it. Have fire extinguishers. Years ago, one of the first tractors that I had, I was scraping the road, and all of a sudden something happened, and the top of the engine started to burn. That was right under the gas tank, and it wasn't long before the gas line was burning, and it all burned right there. I couldn't scrape up enough dirt to throw on it. I didn't have water to put on it. And you better believe every vehicle I have has a fire extinguisher. If I had had one that way, that day I would have still had a tractor. Fire extinguishers and firefighting equipment. And you need experience and forethought. You need to think about it. Storm. Don't build in a floodplain. There's a 100-year floodplain that you can find, and you don't want to build there. I don't care if it's close to the beach. Don't do it. You need to make provision for flood. Even where we live in the knobs, the low hills, we had a microburst, and the water was flowing 12 to 14 inches deep down the middle of the road. It can happen anywhere, depending on your weather. Hurricane. If you're in an area where hurricanes are prevalent, you may want to have shutters, and you may want to have provisions. Just like in a flood, you may not be able to cross the river to go to town to get, so if you have provisions, you may still be able to eat. A tornado, a shelter with the door opening inward, and again, provisions. Ice and snow, provisions. Earthquake, you're better off to be outside or in a bamboo thicket. Tsunami, you need to be on high ground. They're not earth-shaking, they just happen. And you need to think carefully about what you're going to do and do it. Not only do you want a root cellar that's preferably down in the ground, below ground, secure, with an inward opening door, but you're going to want, well, if it's a root cellar, you're going to have some food that's stored in there, so you won't starve. But it would be nice if you had a skylight in it, so that while you were in there for a storm, you had a little bit of light instead of in a dark cave somewhere. And chances are you're going to have some bodily function needs that will need elimination. And it would be nice to have a little provision for light and sanitation in your root cellar if you're going to use it in case of storm and times of duress. You may decide that you really are serious about hardening a part of your house, and you want an area in your basement. You can put shelves or something that you can unlatch a certain way, and you can walk right through the shelves, through the door, into this area. You may get so sophisticated as to have a trap door from upstairs in the bedroom. You just walk into the closet and you just drop down the floor. I don't know what you want. You may decide once you get in that hardened area, well, yeah, it needs to be fireproof, so I want enough concrete between me and it so if the house burns down, it still doesn't fry me in my area. Or you may decide, I don't need concrete all around, but if there are bullets running around, I want something to stop them. And all you have to do is put gravel in your walls, and that will stop the bullets, most of them. So again, it's very intentional. You can harden a space, but you don't, again, want it to be a tomb. You want an escape route. And you can take it, you can put a old heat and air unit enclosure way out there in the woods, and somebody's going to say, oh wow, what in the world's that thing doing here, before you stick your head out and go hopping away, so that you're not trapped in there. I don't know what provisions you want to make, but I'm saying the thoughtful person will think about it and make provision. Food, sprouting, survival. I just got the book about foraging food. The Botencos were on the Pacific Coast Trail from Mexico to Canada. They had sent their food packs along to the various stops, and they realized that they only had 60% of the food that they really needed. And they weren't going to make it to the other end unless they made a change in their plans. And the mother, Victoria, was down at the spring getting water one morning, when she saw some funny looking celery growing up by the spring. They decided it was wild celery. They ate a little bit. Nobody died, so they ate some more. They picked some for their trail. And by the time they reached Canada, they had all lost a bunch of weight, and they were getting most of their food stuff, 60 to 80% of the food they were eating, they were foraging along the way as they went. Now, I can tell you, and we can do a seminar on foraging food, that wild food has higher nutrition than the cultivated food. David Wolfe, wherever he is in the world, forages his food 45 minutes a day. That's how he gets his food. We need to know what's edible and what's poisonous, and that's real good when we're on the move and in a survival situation. Foraging is good. If we can settle down in an area, then we need to study our microclimate. We've talked about how we can mineralize our soil and have a 20-plus year fertility reservoir, so we don't have to have a lot of inputs. And we need to think about seeds and supplies, what we're going to grow and eat. And then we need the tools. Not only do I need my power tools, but when I don't have power, what am I going to use to do things? And I'm going to demonstrate some of those, and the tools and equipment for canning and dehydrating. So, as far as growing, we may have weather volatility. It will get worse. I don't think it will be the same. In fact, John Casey has written a book, Dark Winter. We're on the cusp of a 25 to 30 year cooling spell where it's going to get colder. It will be wetter. We may need to think about growing in beds. Earthworks will help us in a drought condition. Crop failure can be alleviated by having several years' worth of stored food. Now, hoarding, I don't believe in hoarding, but I think there's wisdom in having enough to make provision for you and your family. Growing for sustenance versus taste. Something in my stomach is better than a gnawing ache. There's the dark winter. Let's prepare. I would suggest that while we might like cantaloupe or honeydews or strawberries, if we don't live in the ideal climate, there may be some preferred foods, some varieties that we end up leaving off because they're harder to produce. And as we get into an emergent sustenance type of growing situation, we need to keep that in mind. Radiation. There's exposure. Yes, we need to avoid exposure. Our diet will to large degree sustain us, but we can have potassium iodine, which ties up the iodine in our body. After Fukushima Daiichi, there was a while when you couldn't buy any potassium iodine. It ties up the receptor sites on the thyroid, so the radioactive iodine can't get on those receptor sites and cause cancer. Spirulina and chlorella are both small organisms. They're very good for us, very nutritious, have high protein, and one of the companies in Britain sent some spirulina over to the Chernobyl people. And by ingesting that spirulina, it protected them from the radiation that they were still exposed to and consuming in their food. Deep organic will protect us from radiation, and archaea eats radiation and will reduce the radiologic load. Well, how do you deal with emergencies in life? A few inputs is the way you deal with finances. Just don't need to buy very much. You can barter guns, ammunition, growing supplies, food, coins, metal. Food and medicine will be the greatest bartering things. That's chickens, eggs. Take care not to become a target. Don't have a lot of food. Don't have fuel. Don't have light when no one else has it. Don't go cook something right out on an open fire where someone else can smell it and say, they've got food. We don't have any. Let's go. Prepare for known health challenges. Some of us have health challenges and we can prepare for those. And then gain a health knowledge, and we're going to talk about knowledge and training. Get health supplies that you can use for yourself and for others. We've chosen to buy ascorbic acid in bulk, and we divide it up and sell it. MSM, it holds inflammation down. It deals with trauma, muscular connective tissue trauma. Activated charcoal, pink Himalayan salt, all of those things we have in bulk and split up and sell. But you need first aid knowledge. When people are getting sick and dying of various things, do you have the knowledge to be able to help them with common supplies? Keith Scott Mumby wrote a book entitled World Without Antibiotics. What are you going to do when you can't get antibiotics? We need to take personal responsibility for our health. We'll be more healthy. We need to live an optimal lifestyle. But once we do that, we will still have the potential of getting infections. Ebola, measles, MRSA, whooping cough. But again, remember that if we have some things, we also use food-grade hydrogen peroxide. Put a drop of that per ounce of water and drink it to make sure we don't get colds and flu. First aid, medic training, and we need to be able to help others, especially from a knowledge standpoint, because they will not be aware. And most of the medicines that people rely on are not made in this country. So if things break, they won't be able to even get the medicine. Thomas Levy, who is an MD and an attorney, says that regular dosing of vitamin C at nearly one's bowel tolerance can be expected to prevent virtually all infectious diseases. The body uses vitamin C to fight all sorts of infections, whether it's the 50-gram cold, the 100-gram flu, the 150-gram mononucleosis, or the 200-gram cancer or something else. Many of the physical signs of death mirror in large degree the physical signs of scurvy. And it may well be that the body scarfs up all the vitamin C to deal with the disease. So we need to be careful. I would suggest to you, no matter what the challenge, short of a apocalypse, and including apocalypse, we will be better off in the country than in the city with preparation and provisions like we've been given counsel. I would close by the recounting of the story of the generals' wives, because the generals' wives were told by the generals themselves, you need to have a packed suitcase in your trunk at all times, because when things get bad, that given city is going to be shut down. Whoever's in is in. Whoever's out is out. Well, I thought about that, made sense, okay. And then we have a friend who is the assistant to the CEO of a very large corporation in Atlanta. And I mentioned that, and she said, you know, we just had a seminar. And the basis of the seminar was you need to have a packed suitcase in the trunk of your car, because should anything happen, you'll not have time enough to go home and pack it and get out. A word to the wise is sufficient.